Ever since I started this channel and began planning out what samurai video games I wanted to cover in my reviews, one game that kept popping back into my head was actually Age of Empires 3. And I do know what you are thinking. Wait, Age of Empires 3 is not a samurai game? And you are absolutely right. Age of Empires 3 is not a samurai game. At least not totally. However, with the release of the definitive edition of Age of Empires 3, I knew I had to come and talk about it. So here we are. Age of Empires 3 has always had a special place in my heart. Although I was old enough at the time to have gotten into Age of Empires 2, I actually never really hopped into it. Largely because I ended up spending most of my RTS game time on a little known gem called Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, which is actually just Age of Empires 2 but with a fresh coat of Star Wars paint. However, the game that would truly become my favorite RTS title of all time was just off on the horizon. I remember walking around my local Target with my parents in 2007 when I came upon a display for Age of Empires 3: The Asian Dynasties expansion, with its cover art being a downright epic depiction of Date Masamune at the Siege of Osaka. I had to have it, which luckily enough was what I received for Christmas, along with the base Age of Empires 3 game. I fell in love with it. Not only did I enjoy its playstyle and theme, but even more so its mechanics. And this is the point in the video where I could go off onto more of the game as a whole. Its functionality, countries, the rest of my own history with it, and my time diving into multiplayer with friends. But I know that would be getting off topic, because what you are here for is samurai. So for a lot of that other general information stuff, I know there are a lot of other videos out there that you can find that do dive into that. So with that said, let's talk about the Age of Empires 3 Japanese faction and its awesome storyline. Of course, I'm going to be using only footage from the absolutely beautiful definitive edition of the game, which was just released on October 15th, 2020. If you want to see what the graphics or specifically the Japanese faction looked like in the original version of the game, check out this video here from the Ace Striker, who does a fantastic comparison of the two. Link in the description. Now, for those of you who don't know the time frame of Age of Empires 3, generally the game takes place from the late 1400s to the mid to late 1800s, so a nearly 400-year span. If you were to put that into context for Japan, that would be from the early years of the Sengoku Jidai, Japan's age of warring states, to the end of the Edo period, essentially the end of the age of the samurai. Technically, this game's time span would push it into the years of the Meiji Restoration, but this depiction of Japan we are playing is very clearly Tokugawa Shogunate Japan. Although interestingly enough, while many of the other Western nations can have a revolution, the Japanese faction cannot, which actually, now that I think about it, is a pretty big missed opportunity, to be honest, seeing as how Japan did sort of go through its own revolution. But moving on, the way I actually want to go about this video is to first talk about the incredibly interesting Japanese single-player story. Then afterwards, I'm going to dive more into the real meat of the Japanese faction's playstyle and units. So the story itself for the Japanese starts in 1598, right after the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. What follows is the series of events leading up to the Battle of Sekigahara, arguably the most important battle in samurai history. The main character we follow throughout the story is named Kichiro. He is an adopted son of Tokugawa Ieyasu, and eventually he comes to learn a dark secret that he never knew about his childhood and upbringing. However, another big character in the story is actually Torimoto Tara. In fact, because of this game, this is the depiction of Torimoto Tara that always sticks in my head. Mototara is sort of a mentor figure to Kichiro as they embark on a campaign to lay siege to Ishida loyalists at Osaka, defeat Uesugi Kagekatsu in the east, and secure the Tokaido Road for the Tokugawa army. Eventually, we also take part in the siege of Fushimi, and of course, the Battle of Sekigahara. Now, obviously, by no means is this campaign 100% historically accurate. It's clear that the goal was to hit the iconic tone of feudal Japan rather than stick to historical realism, but it's still really fun nonetheless. Being that this game incorporates some of the cheesy style RTS cutscenes, you really can't ask for too much. Nevertheless, I still have a good time with it, and on top of that, the new updated cutscenes and graphics of the Definitive Edition make it all the more enjoyable. Also, I did record each mission of the Japanese story, so if that is something you guys would like to see me upload with commentary, just let me know in the comments, because I do think that could be a pretty fun little series. Now getting into the core part of the game, the actual custom online and offline battles. These see you and your opponents establishing colonies all across Asia and both North and South America in a bid to expand your empires. It is sort of odd that the Tokugawa Shogunate is acting like an imperial power in this respect, but I just like to think of it as an alternate reality where Ieyasu decided to follow in the footsteps of Hideyoshi and have some overseas ambitions. Of course, the core feature of this game is building up your colony, either alone or with allies, as you try to defeat your enemies on the other side of the map. You can either do this by outright destroying them or by occupying the majority of the trading posts and succeeding with a monopoly. And it is important to remember that the town you are establishing during your match is actually, of course, just a colony, working to expand your empire's territorial ambitions. This is further showcased through home city shipments to your colony. Now, this used to work a little bit different in the original release of Age of Empires 3, so I'm going to first explain how it used to be before discussing how it is now. Originally, you used to work to level your city up, gaining access to new shipment cards that you could then include to your deck, building a powerful combination of shipments to easily create strategies to achieve victory. There was this definite form of progression that I liked, as you would level up and continue to unlock new cards, becoming a more powerful faction. Although the Definitive Edition does still keep the leveling aspect, there doesn't seem to be a reward for it, at least not that I can see, as instead you now get all of the cards available to you immediately. I'm still on the fence about deciding if I like that change or not. But getting back to the actual game, throughout each match you advance throughout ages, starting first in the Exploration Age, known as the Discovery Age in the original release of the game. Which, by the way, heads up, they did actually change a number of things in the game, probably for the better. A number of things that may have been offensive to indigenous peoples, they actually tweaked and fixed, working alongside Native American communities to ensure that realistic portrayals were given, not only of language, but also of certain terms. They changed things like discovery to exploration, because you're not actually discovering this land, there are actually people there first. But moving on, the next age that you advance to is the Commerce Age, which also got a name change, being originally known as the Colonial Age in the original version of the game. Next up is the Third Age, the Fortress Age, followed by the Fourth Age, which is the Industrial Age, and then finally the fifth and last age, the Imperial Age. The difference for Japan is that, like all the other Asian factions in the game, instead of choosing a significant figure to advance your civilization in age, you instead decide on a wonder to build. Each wonder not only comes with bonus troops or buildings, but also has a lasting effect after you construct it. Of the 5 wonders available to you, you will end up building 4 throughout your match. You can choose from the Toshogu Shrine, the Shogunate, the Great Buddha, the Golden Pavilion, and a generic set of torii gates. Another interesting feature for specifically the Asian factions in Age of Empires 3 is the concept of export. Export is an exclusive resource that Asian factions slowly build up over time, which they can then use to spend at a consulate. Consulates are, of course, hubs for foreign influence. Here you can choose to ally yourself with countries that historically traded with Japan or instead remain isolationist. Each has their own benefit. As if you go with a foreign power, you will receive some awesome faction-specific buildings and units. Yet, if you remain isolationist, you will instead receive more unique upgrades and powerful Japanese military units. And speaking of units, let's get into those now. Each country in the game comes with a unique roster of military units from which to build an army, each with a whole host of upgrades that not only improve stats but also upgrade the appearance of the unit itself. There are also a ton of naval units we could get into here as well, but I'm actually going to choose to skip over naval stuff here. While it can be a large portion of the game depending on the type of map you are playing on, I generally consider it to be secondary to what's happening on land. Still though, Japan does have some interesting naval units to choose from. Now, specifically in terms of a land military, Japan has very good infantry units. While Yumi archers are pretty run-of-the-mill, the Ashigaru foot soldiers and samurai can be pretty powerful. And while the Ashigaru is a good ranged unit, they can also hold their own in melee if need be. In fact, interestingly enough, in the definitive edition, they also made it so that the Ashigaru will pull out a Yari spear when engaged in up-close combat. However, samurai are still the ultimate melee unit for Japan, obviously. In terms of cavalry, Japan's actually kind of lacking, as they just have 2 units to choose from. Naginata cavalry and Yabusame mounted archers, both of which sort of inaccurate for the period as well, as by that point, most mounted shock cavalry was actually using the Yari spear, and we also aren't really seeing as many mounted archers by this point in samurai history either. But in terms of practicality, while the Naginata cavalry can be pretty nice mounted spear units that work well against most artillery, they don't really have too many other uses, and as for the Yabusame, they kind of are just meh. I don't personally use them at all. Please tell me if I'm missing something and they're actually this great unit that I'm just ignoring. Japan also lacks in the realm of artillery, which actually is something that is historically accurate, as we don't really see artillery being used until the late 1500s, probably not even until the early 1600s. You do get a unit that shoots a fire arrow out of a cannon, which just does not stack up against the competition, and you also get the Motaru, which actually is really good against buildings, but of course nothing else. Now, the real unique element for the Japanese roster is actually the Daimyos, which are leaders on the battlefield who not only provide a buff to all units around them, but also can train more units on the fly and act as hubs to receive shipments from your home city. I don't think there is really anything else in the game like them. They kind of do everything. Daimyos you can get besides just a generic daimyo are Tori Mototara, Kato Kiyomasa, and Date Masamune. On a similar but more powerful note, you can also get Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu, who comes with additional abilities and even more units he can train. There are other daimyo in the game that you can see in the story but are unavailable to you in regular matched play. They are Ishida Mitsunari, Hosokawa Tadaoki, and Otani Yoshitsugu. Funny enough, they all have the exact same character model. Additionally, if you decide to remain in isolation at your consulate, you can also receive some other unique and powerful units. The Yamabushi, who is good against infantry, the Shinobi no Mono, who is good against buildings, the Ninjutsu Zukai, who is good against mercenaries and other specialty units, and probably the most overpowered unit Japan has, the Hatamoto Samurai. Seriously, these guys are incredible. Once again, I could make an argument about the shinobi/ninja units and their accuracy, but Lastly, there are some other Japanese units that you can get from time to time, often depending on certain native allies or even mercenary shipments. These are Repentant Ronin and Waku Ronin units, and also Sohei units, which are a nice foot spear unit. Also, really lastly, because I forgot to mention them, there is also your Explorer unit that you start with, which for Japan is actually 2 units. 2 warrior monks. And what's funny is that for the original release of the game, these guys were actually named Iko and Iki, which is a pretty funny inside joke, but for the definitive edition, they instead changed them to some generic monk names. And that's really all there is in terms of units for Japan. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of details about the architecture of the Japanese buildings that we could get into, but that's not my area of specialty, and I don't want to try to dive into that at the moment, so unfortunately, that is something we're going to have to leave untalked about. So, all in all, Japan is a very fun faction to play in Age of Empires 3, and one of the core reasons I love this game so much. Probably helping influence me a lot when I was younger in terms of my love for Japanese history. Although I do like playing many of the other countries in Age of Empires 3, I always end up coming back to Japan. Just like Shogun 2 and so many other games, each unit's unique dialogue lines are burned into my brain and will always stay there forever. So yeah, this is not a formal review or anything. Technically it can't be because Age of Empires 3 is not strictly a samurai game. But once again, I couldn't help myself. I really wanted to make this. But in terms of Age of Empires 3, have you played it? What do you like about it? What countries do you like playing? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, obviously, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.